When you run a small business, particularly as an artist, you have to do what you need to do in order to sell your products and make money. Sometimes that looks like constantly posting on social media, buying ads for yourself, and even handing out flyers for brick and mortar type locations. For me, personally, that looks like going to anime and comic book conventions to vend in their artist alley area and maybe the occasional local ish craft fair. This involves a bit of traveling since the US is actually just vast swatches of rural land peppered with the occasional city, and with a lot of travel comes with dealing with a variety of different kinds of people, as different cities have their own cultural norms, no matter how similar they might seem at first glance to the cities that you're already used to and familiar with. Through my years of being a vendor at artist alleys, I've had my fair share of irritating run ins with the occasional weirdo, just general bad experiences with people who are meant to be my hired help for an event, and of course, my incessant need to fist fight buildings. So, this is just detailing out some of those instances. Hey there, I'm here to interrupt your regularly scheduled entertainment. I'm not going to be going into these stories with any sort of like chronological order, so these are just as they come to me. Despite the fact that MIDI conventions that I vend at have been around for an obnoxiously long time, some of them being over 10 years old at this point, many of them are actually incredibly poorly organized, and it tends to show the most to me during load in and load out instructions given to artists and paid staff working at venues who are not actually a part of the convention staff. The miscommunication between con staff and venue staff might be the worst when it comes to traveling to these conventions, since if you're unfamiliar with where to go for the load-in area, having venue staff also not knowing why you're pulling into the loading bay can be frustrating for everyone involved, especially if you're the first one there and start holding up the line of traffic while the venue staff is trying to contact con staff to verify that you're where you need to be. Often, conventions don't include clear instructions on how to even find the loading bay areas for these events, and just trust that people who might have never even been to that location in their lives can just find it magically. And that's made even worse when there's no signage around and the GPS is leading you in a complete circle. Probably the funniest instance of a loadout mishap for me, when you're packing up to go home, was when con staff directed us to this elevator to take our stuff down to like this garage area. And we all ended up in some like weird back rooms type area full of old chairs, tables, pipes, a couple of really creepy mannequins, and just an unholy amount of cobwebs. It sincerely looked like nobody had been down there in like 20, 30 years. We were led down that way because the people with bigger setups were using the larger elevators to go in and out of like the loading bay, like car area. And the staff member thought that both these elevators, the small one and the large one, led to the same exact places. They obviously did not. And the small group of us, maybe like 10 people or so, we all ended up wandering around the halls of this basement type area of the convention center, getting more and more lost because we were just convinced that this con staff person just wouldn't send us down there for no reason. Eventually, a security guard ended up finding us, and after yelling at us and scaring the absolute shit out of us, they led us to the parking garage where we were finally able to escape from this back room type maze. I'm not sure if that security guard went to like scold the con staff for leading us down there to begin with or anything because we left like right after that. The worst case of irritation from like unclear loading instructions for me was definitely the first time that I went to DC for a convention and my mother took me. She has an even shorter temper than I do, so I guess it wasn't exactly the convention venue or the convention staff that caused the frustration with the loading area. My mom just didn't want to bother looking for it at all. And luckily, when I did this convention, I was using like these foam boards for my setup, so I was able to get my entire setup and all my product to the convention table area relatively easy from the hotel room. Communications for load in and load out stuff actually goes beyond just instructions and emails. Like convention staff needs to be like aware and leading people around like the loading areas in general, like when people are bringing their trucks into like the halls to like load in and load out, right? With one case of mismanagement actually causing someone to get hit by a car during a tear down process at one of the events that I went to. Luckily they were okay, but they insisted later like on Discord and Facebook and everything like that, like that people really needed to be way more careful when they were driving inside of like the venue areas. And since like a lot of these conventions have really unclear like load in and load out information, I have found times where I needed to find alternative ways to get my setup and products into the building. And that's usually by just using the closest average door from where I was able to park. And I know what you might be thinking, that I should just drove around in circles until I found the loading area. But gas is expensive, and I'm impatient, easy to anger, and kind of stupid. So I just pick and choose what battles I want to engage in and what's worth my frustration. The issue with being so impatient and just using any normal doorway is that often led to issues when I was using these like giant steel grids for my setup. They were like 6 feet tall. And while they looked very nice, they were just a pain in the ass. Not only did I constantly pinch my fingers on them, but since they were so tall and they didn't fold, sometimes it was a challenge to fit them through shorter doorways. The easiest way to get these grids onto our trolley setup was just to have them standing straight up, which led them to be taller than 6 feet because the trolley was like had pretty big wheels, you know? So I would say that they were probably closer to 7 feet, like with the trolley set and stuff. This led to them getting stuck on doorways and needing to either like jostle the trolley around, tilting it, leaning it, hoping for the best, sometimes just dismantling the stack of boxes to remove the grids in order to get the trolley through before putting the grids back and then restocking all the boxes. Which I know, again, you might be thinking, why don't, like, at that point, I just keep the grids off until I get to the doorway and then put them on once we're inside the doorway? Well, unfortunately, like, the shorter doorway problem, if, like, there's one short doorway, there's a bunch of short doorways in that building. And a lot of the time when I'm coming from, like, the parking garage area over, like, skywalks or, like, through the convention center to get to the, like, artist alley hall, like, there's just so many doorways and but they're too heavy just to like carry around normally. And plus, like I said, they pinched your fucking fingers. I don't use those grids anymore because obviously they were too much of a hassle just to keep around. I've since evolved my entire setup to using like these collapsible photo backdrops, which, while better to transport, they also have their fair share of issues, like with how a small breeze can just knock them over, at least if you don't put any weights on them. Which unfortunately, the very first time that I ever used them, I didn't really know that they didn't come with weights on the tripod because I just thought that was kind of something that they probably should have came with, but that's my fault for not reading the like product listing, I guess. And with the photo backdrops being so easy to knock over, this leads to another issue I have in general with most conventions that I vend at, and that's just the severe lack of space that they give you between tables. While we were coming out of like COVID lockdown, they allowed a ton of space between our tables in order to adhere to the kind of idea of social distancing, and that was just absolutely heavenly. It gave us so much freedom to set up our spaces without being elbow to elbow, and I was hoping that we'd kind of keep some semblance of that going forward, but as the restrictions have pretty much lifted completely at most conventions that I go to, we're back to being elbow to elbow, back to back at events. This, of course, has caused a lot of tension amongst my team and neighbors, as it's easy to knock into not only the display elements, the tables, but also the people as well. It's made worse when you have atrociously poor spatial awareness like I do, and you just smash your hips into everything. I've definitely collected my fair share of like glares and like fake whispered rudeness from people that just didn't want to say like rude things to my face. And I get it, I understand because it's frustrating to be crammed in like sardines at these conventions. Speaking of table namers, there was this one convention where, oddly enough, I wasn't sat next to other artists. I was kind of put off to a wall by myself, and my table neighbor was actually a special guest. He was the voice actor for Lord Zed from Power Rangers, Robert Axelrod. At this time, he's since passed away, unfortunately, but it was kind of a weird convention in general when I was sat next to him. With his advanced age, you would assume that he would have some sort of assistant or maybe con staff with him to help him out. But no, he was just placed at the table by himself with some photos and markers and just left alone the entire weekend. He ended up sleeping most of the convention, like he literally just couldn't stay awake. And while we weren't responsible for him, me and my assistant definitely felt that we should keep an eye on him to make sure that people didn't like steal his photos, touch him without his consent, and make sure that he didn't die while sleeping there. That might sound horrifically dramatic, I know. But he was very old, and positional asphyxia is very dangerous to both young children and the elderly. I felt very bad for him through the entire weekend because when he was awake, it was pretty obvious he just really did not want to be there. And he would constantly call con staff to ask for things, and it would take forever for his request to be met. The time that he was asking for them to take him to the airport sincerely just broke my heart. We tried our best to like help him out like when he was awake and like when he was asking for things, but at the end of the day, like we couldn't take him to the airport obviously, and con staff had to do like a majority of the other things he was asking for. It was just really unfortunate that during that convention he didn't have any proper help that was there with him for a majority of the day. And I hope that like if they dragged him to any other conventions throughout the year, that he had help at those other conventions before he sadly passed away. I know that was a pretty rough little section there with discussing what could have potentially been elder abuse and all. So let's try to segue back over to fun bitching, maybe? I'm sorry for being a downer there. Speaking of people there to help at conventions, I actually used to have this table helper who went with me to every convention for a while. It was a friend of mine who I paid at the end of the weekend for their time just for being a good helper, basically. Well, it just so happened that this friend also liked to make crafts to a degree, and I was always trying to encourage people to find their passions, make things, and even make some money along the way from doing that. So when this friend expressed an interest in making things to sell at the booths that we ran, I said, hell yeah, let's do it. I was super excited. At first, it seemed okay, although they didn't really make a lot of product because they were making scarves and plushies or whatever. It takes a little more time than ordering prints and stickers since they obviously had to make each individual unit by hand. But I tried to be as helpful and encouraging as I could, offering extra fabric, stuffing, and even sessions at my house to like co-work on plushies for like a small monetary split with the majority being in their favor. This too seemed to go pretty all right for a time, and it encouraged me to even start making my own plushies for a little bit, dedicating more space on the table to crafts as opposed to just prints and stickers, hoping that having a more extensive variety of different kinds of like sewn things would lead more people over to our table that were interested in fiber arts and crafts, basically. The problems did seem to arise pretty quickly, though, into this like new form of partnership, when that friend would get a little testy when people misidentified what their plushies were meant to be. I don't believe that it was their intention at all, but their insistence on what the object needed to be ended up driving some potential customers away from their products and our booth altogether. I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to sell something, right? So if you're insistently saying no, it's not that until someone walks away, you're losing sales. If they believe it's something else, just let them believe it, you know? But I didn't think that this like dejection over people not being able to tell what their plushies were was like all that terrible. It could have been solved with some sort of like cute signage or a label declaring what the creature was actually supposed to be. But as we continued to vend together over the next few conventions, I noticed that they started to become more and more dejected the less their products sold, specifically the products that they made entirely on their own without any of my input or help. I tried to remain encouraging to the best of my ability that this stuff just takes time. And I even try to offer suggestions to like improve their products and maybe even some new items that they could add to their lineup. After a while of these suggestions going completely unanswered, came an unfortunate blow up directed towards me. And I will acknowledge that I do have a very bad habit of offering completely unsolicited advice, especially to friends that I love and care about. So I can't pretend that I didn't have any fault within this situation since I'm pretty annoying. But I felt this interaction was just very disproportionate to the situation, especially at the time. Basically, what ended up happening is that after another round of trying to help brainstorm products and other things to help things sell, this friend told me that they just didn't have time and energy to make stuff, that they didn't have the materials, which wasn't exactly true since I had given them a ton of materials that they never ended up using, and that it would cost them more to get materials than they would ever earn back by selling the items because they believed that no matter what, I was always going to earn more money than them because I had way more products. They went on to say some not too nice things that amounted to them thinking that what I did was easy since all I had to do was order prints, which at the time was very condescending because it takes me weeks to work on a single illustration. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the point that they were trying to make, and I even pointed it out in this video, right? But at the time, it still felt like a slap in the face the way that they were attempting to guilt trip me for supplying products to my own business. This, of course, could have also just been a lost in tone type of problem that often occurs in text based formats, but I was still overall pretty unhappy with this exchange because I didn't know how to help them in their confidence as a creative. The back and forth exchange between us with this situation ended on a not great note, with me attempting to be as polite as possible with recommending that they start booking their own booths at these conventions for their own products and setups so I wouldn't be in the way of stealing any potential business. We didn't table together again after that, and their responses towards me in chats following this exchange just felt kind of hostile, and I had a suspicion that they were mad at me for the remainder of the time that we talked until eventually they just ghosted me one day. I still occasionally see them on my personal Facebook, and every couple of years they try to like relaunch their crafting or gaming as like a career, only to quit a couple of weeks or months later getting into it. I hope that they do succeed one day, but I won't be around to help that goal in the long run. Some friendships just turn incompatible after a while, and unfortunately, we all have just to think that's okay. This situation with that former friend has basically just taught me the hard lesson that you can be as helpful and encouraging as possible for someone to reach their goals and dreams and whatnot, but it ultimately is up to them to push themselves in that direction. And if they just don't want to put in the effort, there's not a lot you can do for them. Following the separation from that table helper, I was kind of in a pickle as I didn't even want to try to attempt vending by myself. Being an anxiety ridden baby and not having reliable transportation at the time, I ended up getting my mom to take me to a couple of events with the idea that she would stay at the booth and help me out as needed. Now, I didn't think that she was going to be like this most greatest helper in the world, but she would be there for setting up, tearing down, and just making sure that I didn't get robbed whenever I had to go to the bathroom or grab a snack. For both the conventions that she took me to and agreed to help me at, that is not what ended up happening. Instead, she found her way to the hotel rooms that I had booked for these events and ignored me rather completely for the entire weekend. This led to me not only almost pissing myself a couple of times, in which I just had to hope for the best and run to the bathroom, but also going hungry for the entire weekend as she would never answer her phone, and I continued to call her and beg her to bring me lunch and just nothing. Also, just the sheer waste of money as she never left the hotel rooms. She never needed the badges that I got her for these conventions, which one of the badges was more than $60 since they didn't offer helper badge discounts for that artist alley for some fucking reason. In addition to the badge prices, she also just terrorized the hotel staff at one event by not liking the room we were assigned, which ended with her staying the whole day in that room only for her to get into a screaming match at the front desk when I went to go like stay in the room myself, and we ended up having to leave early and driving 4 hours home in the dark. I couldn't even convince the hotel staff to give me my money back for that room, which again, I never even had a chance to step foot into because my mom had been there all day in the room, lounging about, watching TV, and using all of the facilities. It was just truly a nightmare situation that day. Luckily, a friend of mine was listening to all of my woes about like my mom being like the worst table helper who wasn't a table helper, and she agreed to help me out during my next event and has been for years now. Very dedicated assistant. I love her. That former table partner that I mentioned wasn't the only friend that I kind of had a falling out with. This other friend I had like a pretty serious falling out with. So let me bring up an entirely different time here. This friend that I had the major falling out with, I'd met in my late teens and like 18, 19 area. And I was friends with them until like very early 20s. I think about 3 years. I think I stopped being friends with them like when I was like 21, maybe 22. Okay. They were infamous within con spaces around where I live for being incredibly two-faced, and wherever they went, drama was sure to follow. But it always seemed to take everybody like a while to realize that it was this person that was the root cause of it all. This friend caused a lot of mayhem in the lives of me and my friends, ranging from like kind of sort of kidnapping me for a week, and also when it comes to my other friends, stealing just thousands and thousands of dollars from them in forms of unpaid rent, bills, and other stuff. I think at one time they tried to do some like weird revenge plot of getting like someone's utilities cut off when like they were kicked out because they weren't paying their fair share of the bills, but I don't remember that story too clearly, so I could be misremembering some aspects of it. Now, our friendship breakup initially wasn't actually messy. Just one day I realized how fucking horrible they were to me and everybody around me, and I just dipped. I blocked them on everything and I just ghosted. It's probably not the most graceful or respectful way to handle that, but I was young, immature, sheltered, and I just didn't know how to properly stand up for myself besides just ghosting the problem. Anyway, this person didn't take any sort of hints that like someone doesn't want anything to do with them, and they tried to block evade a multitude of times by like making new accounts, reaching out to me on burner accounts, reaching out to me on their significant others accounts for a time without their significant other knowing, which led to me having to block their significant others. Just it was a mess. And eventually my friends had to just tell them to leave me the fuck alone, right? This person would end up then like trying to spread a bunch of garbage about me online and everything, and it was like whatever, right? I don't care, you're blocked, I don't have to see any of that. But it got to the point because they were still in the area like where I vend at artist alleys and stuff, where it got to the point where they would turn in a room and just leave the room if they saw me at a convention. And this was well and good because I was always in the artist alley, I was always working, so I was always stuck in one location, so it's not like I was hard to avoid. But a couple of years after the friendship breakup and everything, apparently they got like a little more bold, a little more brave, and they decided to stay within the hall, within my eye line, with a gaggle of their new like teen friends, which admittedly was pretty weird because at the time they were almost 30, and this was like 10 years ago. And they were pointing and laughing in my direction like a bunch of like high school bullies. It was really, really weird. Eventually, a couple of the people from that group broke off and came up to my table and started talking. And since I was in work mode, customer service, how may I help you? I just smiled along and I was really polite. The weird thing is, though, is that when they came over, they weren't being mean or rude or anything that I kind of expected of the situation, really. In fact, they were like gassing me up and telling me just how amazing my artwork was and I was so talented and yada yada. You've heard it all before. The only real issue was that they were blocking the flow of traffic so other people couldn't come up and buy or browse. They were waving their hands and being really excitable, so people were like giving them a wide berth so they weren't going to get hit in the face kind of stuff. They eventually left after like 20 minutes or so to go back over to the main group with that friend that I had the falling out with, and they just went back to pointing and laughing at me. And it was just incredibly odd, honestly. It's probably the weirdest interaction I can call that was vaguely about that friend that I had the falling out with that wasn't like directly like interacting with them. And sometimes I just wonder if that stunt was just about costing me some sales or if I was just acutely paranoid because that friend had been among that friend group, you know? Honestly, who knows? That person actually ended up fucking off out of state when they were once again mooching off of someone until they were confronted for their behavior. Last I heard, they were still trying to claim to be in their mid 20s, even though they're almost 40 at this point, and befriending and dating people in their late teens and early 20s. That same convention, though, totally different incident that I remember very bitterly. So this isn't about the friend, this is about someone completely else. There was this incident with this neighboring vendor. This particular convention, I had this corner spot against the wall, and the other booth, a part of this story, was sharing that corner spot on the other wall. So we were basically making an L shape between the two tables. I don't think this person in particular was the artist. I think they were just a helper for the artist. But regardless, they were working at that booth alongside another person, right? This was probably a couple of hours after those people that had been gassing me up and then pointing and laughing and everything like that. They'd already left to go do other stuff. So now I had a decently steady stream of people coming to check out my stuff, make small talk, and purchase things. The person at the neighboring table had been screaming and harking all day, insisting people come over to their table and even walking around the table to try to like shepherd people towards them to their booth to shop. This, of course, is not only incredibly inappropriate and unprofessional in a convention setting, but it's also very against the rules, especially at this particular convention. They got like big bold letters in their contract saying not to fucking do this. You're not a kiosk at the mall. You don't have to like harass someone into buying your stuff. The behavior of this individual had actually gotten to the point where a lot of people who were like cycling the room to browse, like doing like laps around the room, they started avoiding that section of the hall because this person was just trying to usher people towards their booth, actively hindering business for like this entire section of artists. As annoying as this was, I kept pushing through business as usual as well as I could, right? This is until I was mid transaction with a couple of people wanting prints. The prints were in the bag. The money was being held out to me. I was reaching for the money, and this person from that neighboring booth swooped over, closed their hand over the money, and said, "Don't waste your money on that. Come check out what I got instead." And basically dragged that person over to their booth by the hand. They did not come back to my booth to buy their prints after this was done, by the way. The poor congoers booked it out the hall as fast as they could after incessantly rejecting this person's very pushy sales pitches. This was my personal final straw with this person, and I ended up reporting to the Macon staff. And evidently, I wasn't the only one reporting this person for their behavior. And I think it was like a three strikes you're out kind of situation, or at least I hope it was only three strikes and not like a 20th strike or whatever. I don't actually recall seeing them anymore through the day because I had to go to the bathroom to cool off because I was so fucking mad over that situation. And when I got back, they were gone. I can only imagine that con staff escorted them out at that point, or at the very least, I hope they did. Not to worry though, the booth itself remained there and open because someone else was, at that table. Like I said, it was two people. And I believe the person remaining at the table was like the actual artist because I overheard them answering some questions about the products and stuff that the other person just wasn't doing. That honestly was probably like the wildest like neighbor story that I've ever had at a convention.
Now testing, testing.
It's time for an interview intermission. For a while, I've been wanting to do like little interviews with fellow artists vending at conventions, but I really never got the confidence to step out and try doing it. But recently, I was put on some medication that's really been helping with my anxiety disorder. So when I was at Cleveland Gaming Classic, I decided to try out asking a couple of artists some questions. This, despite wanting to do it for years, was very unplanned the day of. I didn't go out with like well thought out questions, and the entire exchanges between me and the couple of artists that I ended up interviewing were incredibly awkward. Since doing these incredibly awkward test interviews, I've actually compiled a list of questions to use for future interactions, and I hope to not sound as awkward, maybe a little more put together and less nervous overall. And I just want to have like a better dialogue and exchange with artists in like future interviews, okay? Since I have the footage and I told them that I would post it eventually, I'm going to promote the artist in this video for being just incredibly good sports and dealing with my shenanigans. I'll link both of them in the description, so please check them out and give them a ton of love. Buy from them if they have shops available.
Okay, so go ahead and give me your booth name, like some of the things that you do, and if you're the artist or not.
I am the artist. My name is Crochet Hippie Designs, and I pretty much make all of this. Most of these, so everything on this thing and then that whole section over there are my own patterns that I write as well.
How much yarn do you think it takes you to make one of these like average size figures, like one skein, two skein, and how much stuffing do you usually put in them?
Yes, I would say about one skein overall. Stuffing kind of varies. I tend to stuff mine a little bit more so they're more firm, so that kind of varies from time to time.
Out of all of these, what do you think is your best seller?
I'd say either the turtles in terms of the bigger items, and then smaller items are going to be the pocket ductos or the leggy frogs.
And what kind of yarn do you tend to use, or does that also vary depending on like what's available and what's on sale?
It varies, but most of the time Bernat blanket.
Do you take online orders at all?
Sometimes.
Thank you so much. What's your name, your booth name, and are you the artist or are you just representing them?
Hey, my name's Andrew Shepard, and my booth is Chroma Coma. I am the artist, and I work in oil pastels.
That's really cool. Do you use any fixatives on the pastel paintings after they're done?
So I don't actually use fixatives. So for the original drawings, which I have in the wooden frames kind of over here, I don't use fixatives. I'll put a cover over top of them when I sell them, but I just like the matte look of it without the fixative. Actually, for the prints, you don't have to worry about it for it to smudge or anything. But yes, the original drawings can smudge.
And what about these decorative knives? Are these also pastel originally and then you put a cover over them?
So they are not pastel actually. So my girlfriend actually has her own business and works in resin. I did the artwork digitally for these. So I drew these in Procreate and then I give her the file and then she hand makes and hand paints them out of resin. So her business is Crystal Bunny Designs.
Do you do online orders for anybody that's interested in getting your stuff online?
I do, yeah. My website is chromacomaart.com.
Thank you so much.
So when I very first started out doing artist alley stuff in like a serious sense, like wanting to make this like a career, I shared a table with three of my friends, and although only two of them stuck around during the day, one of them sold things alongside of me. I was just starting out and I didn't have many supplies to vend with. So we ended up like with this like naked table and like poster boards with like 5 or 6 prints tacked onto it. Like it wasn't nothing. They were like tiny little postcard sized prints. So it was kind of pathetic, really. To supplement not having any fucking products, we were offering pencil commissions. Despite not having like a great setup for this convention, I wanted to draw some kind of attention to our table to like promote our products and our commissions and stuff like that. So I had this monitor set up, hooked up to my laptop, and I was drawing live for people to stop and watch so that it would bring like a decent amount of attention to our table, like I mentioned, since no one in the hall was doing something like that. And when you table at conventions, you just sometimes have to accept that some attendees are going to be considered a little weird, especially when both you and them are very obviously neurodivergent in some sense, and the differences between the two of you can clash a little bit. One person in particular kept coming back to our booth periodically to chat and just not buy anything. And by chat, I mean they dropped in front of our table to vent at us like they knew us personally for years. It was a little awkward. They complained about people not knowing who they were cosplaying as, which, in fairness, they didn't look like that character since they were just wearing like the generic uniform of the group that that character belonged to, and they weren't wearing a wig or any makeup or anything like that that would have any sort of indicator of what character that person was supposed to be. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of like mind reading powers they thought the world at large had. In addition to that, they vented a little about canon x OC type shipping, OC cosplay, and how their friends just kept ditching them to do their own devices. I'm not sure what they expected me and my friends to do about any of this, but when you get someone in front of your booth that just wants to chat endlessly, there's not really a whole lot you could do without being very rude to them, unless you have a great assistant like I do that can just lead them away to chat to the side so they're not blocking traffic and hindering your business. But during this convention, none of us stepped up to that task because we were all kind of awkward and inexperienced and not knowing how to like deter people from like just blocking traffic to talk. Luckily, this person would vent a little for like 10-ish minutes or so before wandering away. So they weren't like hindering business that bad, but they would come back again and again every hour or so and just repeated the venting process a few times. Eventually, towards the end of the day, they came back to our table for like the last time, and this time they were actually on a mission. They asked us if we were the booth that their friend had ordered a commission from and explained what the picture was, etc., etc. And I had to regretfully inform them that no, we didn't make that particular image. And they went on to say things like they wanted to order a commission like the one that their friend had, so they were looking around for an artist to make them a picture and not missing a beat to earn money. I mentioned that I was open for commissions if they were interested, and I was confident that I can work within the style that they were interested in. Their response actually kind of floored me because instead of saying no thank you or anything polite like I'm looking for the same artist that my friend commissioned, which I know what you're thinking. Oh, you should have had context clues. It was implied that they were looking for the same exact artist, not just any artist. Shut up, I'm stupid. But yeah, instead of saying anything remotely polite, they just said, I'm looking for the artist that does the good commissions. And of course, the obvious implication here is not you. And honestly, what do you even say to something like that? In this situation, the best thing to do is kind of just grin and bear it, right? Brush off the insult, even if it was unintentional. At first, I did try to defend myself a little, as I have a touch of a short temper, like I mentioned before, and honestly, the comment was rude as hell, but my irritation went over their head as they doubled down on needing to find the artist that was doing the good commissions. There isn't really a happy ending to this situation, really, because they weren't going to listen to me saying, I do good commissions. Like, what are you talking about? I just simply had to, like, wave them off towards another booth that I had overheard was doing commissions and, like, bidding them a nice weekend. Still trying to remain as business polite as I could. It has honestly gotten easier through the years of just being able to ignore people who are rude, even the rare instances of individuals who are rude completely on purpose, because I know art is subjective and not everyone is going to like my stuff. Despite wanting to make money from my art, I do ultimately make it for myself because I do love creating. I just think that more people should realize how incredibly rude it is to stand at your table saying ew to something that you put your heart and soul into, you know? Most interactions I've gotten at conventions are actually pretty mild, with most just being overly excited fans of a franchise wanting to chat for a while and block traffic. But that's remedied pretty well when you have an assistant, like I said, who can stand off to the side and also geek out with them as long as they need to, so business can proceed as usual. Or you get other customers who just stand there and pretend to take your picture, but actually they're filming your boobs when you're wearing a maid outfit. But sometimes you get customers that want to be a little more flashier than that, like this guy who almost had me pull the fire alarm at a convention. Like I mentioned before, I have a pretty severe anxiety disorder that went widely untreated for most of my adult life at this point. And like I've mentioned before in this video, I'm kind of dumb. And I freak out first and think critically about something later. So when someone who was buying products from my table pulled out their wallet and it just suddenly lit on fire as soon as they opened it, I about broke down into tears from being so fucking scared shitless. I never knew those kind of trick wallets existed prior to this situation, and I wouldn't think someone would just keep their money in one, but here we are. With me just crying and asking if they needed me to call a medic because I thought that this dude burned himself. He was a tip your fedora type, or at the very least, he was dressed in that fashion. It could have been a cosplay. Laughed at me, if you can believe it. I gave him his products, he laughed at me and left. Apparently, after talking to con staff about it, he had been terrorizing a bunch of artists and vendors with this little trick. Not sure what they did about that, as that con was infamous for not doing anything helpful for anybody. Like the time that this dude passed out on the ground, like in front of her booth, and they just left him there for like an hour before medics showed up. Despite the fact that me, my assistant, and like five other tables kept calling and calling and calling and was like, yo, someone needs to come and get this dude. Or at the very least, while we're waiting for medics to arrive, like, can you guys come and like block off the area so like nobody steps on him? Like anything? In fact, this convention in particular has caused so many problems for a lot of artists over the years. Like the time that there was this kind of wild miscommunication that led to con staff destroying an artist's entire booth. Now, I only heard about this happening secondhand because it happened on the opposite side of the room that I happened to be at. But apparently, this artist had asked to be sat next to someone specifically, and when they got to the convention and saw that they weren't, they asked con staff if they could switch tables with someone else, or that table was unoccupied and they asked to be sat there instead. I'm not like really sure about the mechanics there, but at the end of the day, the con staff member had talked to them and agreed that it was fine for them to be sat next to the person they wanted to be sat next to know. I think this happened in person, but I guess it could have been an email. I don't know. Anyway, the artist set up their table that they asked for and got cleared to set up at. Well, fast forward to the next morning, and this artist finds out that their table was actively being destroyed by con staff because the head of the artist alley that year was never informed about this change and just assumed this artist had just randomly brought their stuff and claimed a random table. The head of the artist alley claims that they had tried to contact this artist prior to ordering staff to dismantle their booth, but I find that like really hard to believe because how can you think this person A wasn't supposed to be vending at this con while also B having their contact info to tell them that you were destroying their stuff? But I guess in theory there could have been a business card left on the table, but why wouldn't you cross-reference the list of like the business card with the artist that paid for their spots, you know? No way you think about this situation doesn't even make any sense at all. But that's probably why this person ended up being fired from the convention or let go, dismissed, quit conveniently, whatever you want to call it. According to like the other artists around this booth spot, they said that the staff was not careful at all with tearing down this setup and that they had damaged a ton of their products and setup gear. And I'm surprised that they stayed over the weekend to even vend at all after they finally got a hold of the head of the artist alley to argue about the situation. I also heard through the grapevine that the artist was planning on suing the convention for damages, and I hope that they did because the situation was frankly ridiculous. But sometimes it's not the convention staff or even the attendees really causing problems. Sometimes it's an artist causing issues with attendees. While the previous story I told you about the person harassing people and causing me to lose a transaction is pretty bad, it didn't involve potentially the police. One year at a con that I used to vend at pretty frequently, I haven't been for a couple of years, someone was cosplaying like a stereotypical rich character. I can't remember if it was like Seto Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or like that dude from Danganronpa. It was like some rich kid character, right? And they had printed off a bunch of fake money with that character's face on it. Notably, obviously fake, like Monopoly money type of fake. Like you could see it a million miles away how fake it was. This person was trying to be funny and thought it would be a good joke in character to leave this fake money around the convention center, which included in tip jars at the artist alley. One artist, though, did not think that this was very funny because somehow, despite how obnoxiously obviously fake this fake money was, someone thought that this person had left them a real $100 bill in their tip jar, and upon seeing that it was fake, instead of taking the joke in stride because it's a fucking anime convention full of nerds who pretend to be in character while cosplaying because they think they're master actors or whatever, they instead complained that someone was making counterfeit money, with my understanding that they believed that this person was trying to actually buy goods with this fake money. Of course, counterfeiting money is a serious fucking crime, so when this accusation came up, potentially the police got involved. I didn't see them put the cosplayer in handcuffs because, duh, I was in the artist alley working. But attendees were worked up into a frenzy with the rumor train, with it being as wild as possible with their narratives. Like, swarms of cops came busting in through the doors and someone was tackled to the ground, blah, blah, blah. As far as I know, I think it was just one cop. And I don't even think it was a real cop. I think it was just like the venue security dude. And I think the cosplayer was just told to knock it off with the joke. A lot of the situations you hear about from conventions secondhand can sound a lot more extreme than the reality of the situation, like that infamous Sharpie bath thing from the Homestuck fandom, which a lot of people have claimed that has been debunked as like an urban legend rumor or whatever. But honestly, when you put a bunch of neurodivergent, nerdy people into a large space, weird stuff is just bound to happen, and sometimes you can never fact check what actually happened, you know? Do you happen to frequent conventions? Has anything wild happened to you at a con? Like, for no particular instance, a voice actor to an anime that you love came chatting to you, but you didn't know what he looked like in real life, so you just wondered why his badge was a special color compared to all the normal ones? Just me? Okay, that's cool. Please be as polite as possible within the comment sections. I know this was kind of a bitching fest, but it's kind of cathartic to just vent out loud sometimes, you know? If you like this video, leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more. This video, like all of my content, is brought to you by Patreon, so thank you so much to Ippo, Alec, Mel, Zomboy, and Chrome for subscribing. If you want to support me on Patreon, tier start as little as $1 a month. You can get shoutouts at the end of YouTube videos. You can get early access to the artwork that I make. You can get monthly discount codes for my Etsy store. And you can get an invite to an exclusive Patreon only Discord. Also, special thank you to the channel member Megan May. That's all for now. This is Finn, signing off. Until next time.
I can't move on till I let go. I feel so lost, never at home. Need to be strong, every breath hold. 'Cause I can't move on till I